Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be cracking open some fascinating legal documents to explore the world of South African constitutional law.
Sounds pretty dry.
I know, right? But trust me, this is about understanding how, fundamental rights actually work in everyday life.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So we've got this stack of court rulings, academic papers, even chapters from what looks like a constitutional law study guide.
Oh, wow. So it's like we're back in law school.
Kind of. Where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, the study guide's actually structured kind of like how you'd approach this topic in law school.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it starts with the foundations, like the history and context of the South African Constitution.
It makes sense. You wouldn't jump into advanced calculus without knowing, basic math, right?
Exactly.
So what are some of the key takeaways from this historical background?
Well, the guide emphasizes that South Africa's constitution wasn't just a response to apartheid. It was a conscious effort to build a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental rights.
Okay, so it's not just about righting past wrongs. It's about setting a new course for the future.
Exactly.
I'm seeing that theme of transformation pop up a lot in these early chapters.
Right. And the study guide really drives home the point that this transformation is ongoing. The Constitution is a living document constantly being interpreted and applied to new challenges.
That's what makes this so interesting. It's not just a static set of rules. It's a dynamic process.
Right.
So where do those fundamental rights come into play?
Well, the heart of it all is the Bill of Rights, which the study guide dedicates a whole unit to.
Okay.
It's like the instruction manual for how individuals and the state should interact.
So if we're thinking of this like a course, understand the Bill of Rights would be like passing the midterm exam.
You could say that. The study guide stresses that you need to grasp not just what the rights are, but also how they're applied in practice.
Okay, so it's not enough to just memorize a list of rights.
Right.
You need to understand how they work in real-life situations.
Right.
What are some of the key things the study guide highlights?
It breaks down the different categories of rights, from civil and political rights like freedom of speech and the right to a fair trial, to socioeconomic rights like access to housing and health care.
And those socioeconomic rights are what really set the South African Constitution apart, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about protecting you from the government. It's about ensuring basic needs are met.
Precisely. And the study guide emphasizes that these rights aren't just aspirational, they're enforceable.
Okay.
People can go to court to fight for their right to housing or health care.
Wow, that's powerful. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the Bill of Rights sets the stage, but the real action happens when those rights are put to the test in court.
Exactly. And that's where the next unit in the study guide comes in, the limitation of rights. It tackles the tricky question of when it's okay to restrict someone's rights.
That's where things get interesting. Is you can't just have absolute freedom all the time, right?
Right.
There have to be limits.
Right. Think of shouting fire in a crowded theater.
Oh, yeah. Classic example.
Your right to free speech doesn't give you the right to endanger others. So the study guide dives deep into how the courts balance individual rights with the needs of society.
So there's this constant push and pull, trying to find that sweet spot where rights are protected but not abused.
Yeah.
What are some of the key concepts the study guide lays out for understanding this limitation process?
One of the most important is the limitation clause, which is a specific section in the Constitution that sets out the criteria for justifying a limitation on a right.
Okay, so it's not just a free-for-all. There's a legal framework for determining when a limitation is valid. What are some of those criteria?
Well, the study guide lists factors like the nature of the right being limited, the importance of the purpose of the limitation, and whether there are less restrictive ways to achieve that purpose.
So the courts would have to weigh, for example, the importance of public safety against someone's right to protest, and whether there are less disruptive ways to ensure safety.
Exactly, and the study guide emphasizes that this analysis has to be done on a case-by-case basis, considering all the relevant factors. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
It sounds like interpreting and applying the Bill of Rights is a complex and nuanced process. What else does the study guide highlight in this unit on limitations?
It also explores the concept of justifiable infringement, which means that even if a right is limited, it can't be completely destroyed.
Okay.
The core of the right must remain intact.
So even if the government restricts your right to assemble, they can't completely ban all gatherings, right?
Right.
There still needs to be some space for people to exercise that right.
Right, precisely. And that's where the study guide stresses the importance of proportionality.
Okay.
Any limitation on a right must be proportionate to the goal it's trying to achieve.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
Yeah.
We've got the Bill of Rights laying out the fundamental rights. Then the limitation clause, providing a framework for when those rights can be restricted. And the concept of justifiable infringement, ensuring that the essence of the right is always protected.
You've got it. And the study guide emphasizes that this intricate balance between rights and limitations is at the very heart of South African constitutional law.
So we've talked about the history, the Bill of Rights, and the limitation of rights.
Mhm.
What other key areas does the study guide cover in this foundational unit?
Well, it delves into some crucial procedural aspects, like the different types of legal proceedings that can arise when constitutional rights are at stake.
Okay, so this is about understanding the different avenues people can take if they feel their rights have been violated.
Exactly. The study guide breaks down the different types of applications you can make to the court depending on the nature of the case.
So there's not just one constitutional law courtroom where everyone goes.
Yep.
There are different procedures depending on what you're trying to achieve.
You got it. And the study guide really emphasizes the importance of understanding these procedural nuances because they can significantly impact the outcome of a case.
This is fascinating. It's like learning the rules of the game before you step onto the field.
Right.
What are some of the key procedural concepts the study guide highlights?
Well, one of the most important is standing, which refers to whether you have the legal right to bring a case before the court.
So it's not just anyone who can walk in and claim a constitutional violation.
Nope. Well,
You need to have a personal stake in the matter.
exactly. And the study guide provides a detailed explanation of the different types of standing, including direct standing, where you're personally affected, and representative standing, where you're acting on behalf of someone else.
So if I'm personally discriminated against, I have direct standing. But if I'm fighting for the rights of a group of people, I need to establish representative standing. That's interesting.
Right. And the study guide also stresses the importance of ripeness,
Okay.
which means the issue has to be ready for the court to decide on.
So no hypothetical problems or what-if scenarios.
Right.
There has to be an actual controversy that needs resolving.
Precisely. The study guide uses some fascinating case examples to illustrate how courts determine whether an issue is ripe for adjudication.
Okay, so we've covered standing and ripeness. What other procedural hurdles does this study guide mention?
Another key concept is mootness, which means the issue at hand has already been resolved, making a court decision unnecessary.
So if I'm challenging a law that's already been repealed, my case would be moot.
Exactly. The study guide emphasizes that understanding these procedural concepts is crucial for anyone navigating the South African legal system.
It sounds like this foundational unit in the study guide lays a solid groundwork for understanding not just the substance of constitutional rights, but also the process for enforcing them.
You've got it. And I think this sets us up perfectly to dive into some specific case studies and see how these principles play out in real life.
That's exactly where I was hoping we'd go next. I'm ready to see these constitutional principles in action.
Let's do it.
All right, so we've got this solid foundation from the study guide.
Sure.
We understand the historical context, the Bill of Rights, the limitations clause, and even some key procedural concepts. And I'm really curious to see how all this plays out in real-life cases.
Well, the study guide does a great job of weaving in case studies throughout. It's not just about abstract theories, it's about seeing how these principles come to life in courtrooms and impact people's lives.
That's what makes this so fascinating. So where should we start? Which cases really stand out as like landmark examples of South African constitutional law in action?
The study guide dedicates a whole chapter to equality, which is one of the cornerstone values of the South African Constitution. It's not just about treating everyone the same, it's about addressing historical disadvantage and creating a truly level playing field.
Right, because equality doesn't mean much if some people are starting miles behind the starting line. What kind of cases illustrate this principle in action?
One of the most famous cases the study guide highlights is the Supermoney case, which dealt with the right to access health care.
Okay, healthcare is a hot-button issue everywhere. What happened in this case?
Mr. Supermoney was suffering from a serious kidney condition and needed dialysis to survive. He couldn't afford private health care and was denied access to the limited dialysis resources at a public hospital.
So he went to court arguing that his right to health care was being violated.
Exactly. And this case went all the way up to the Constitutional Court, which had to grapple with some really tough questions about the scope of the right to health care and the state's obligations.
I can imagine. What did the court decide?
Well, the court acknowledged that the right to health care is important, but it also recognized that resources are limited. They ultimately ruled that the state couldn't be forced to provide every possible treatment to everyone, especially when those resources were already stretched thin.
So it's a balancing act between recognizing the right and acknowledging the practical limitations of what the government can provide.
Precisely. The study guide emphasizes that the Subramani case established a key principle. While the state has a duty to progressively realize the right to health care, it doesn't have to provide unlimited resources.
That makes sense. But doesn't that leave people like Mr. Subramani in a difficult position?
The study guide acknowledges that tension. The court recognized the tragedy of Mr. Subramani's situation, but they also emphasized that the state had to make difficult choices about allocating scarce resources.
So it's a heartbreaking case, but it also highlights the complexity of balancing individual rights with societal needs.
Exactly. And the study guide points out that the Subramani case sparked a lot of debate and prompted the government to develop policies aimed at expanding access to healthcare.
So even though Mr. Subramani didn't win his case, it brought attention to a crucial issue and pushed for progress. That's impactful in itself.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, the study guide also delves into cases dealing with the right to equality in the context of education.
Education is another area where equality is so crucial. What kind of cases does the study guide highlight?
One case that stands out is the governing body of the Juma Masjid primary school case, which involved a dispute between a religious school and the provincial government.
Okay, what was the issue at stake here?
The school was located on land owned by a religious trust, and the government wanted to relocate the school to a new location. The school argued that this would infringe on their religious freedom and the right to education of their students.
So it's a clash between the government's power to manage education and the school's right to religious freedom. What did the court decide?
The Constitutional Court ruled in favor of the school, emphasizing that the right to education must be exercised in a way that respects religious and cultural diversity.
That's a really interesting decision. It shows how the court is willing to protect the unique needs of different communities, even when it means pushing back against the government.
Exactly. And the study guide points out that this case is significant because it demonstrates that the right to equality isn't just about treating everyone the same. It's also about recognizing and accommodating difference.
It's like that saying, equality is not about giving everyone the same shoes. It's about making sure everyone has shoes that fit.
That's a great analogy. Now let's move on to another foundational right. Human dignity. The study guide dedicates a whole chapter to this concept and explores how it permeates the entire South African legal system.
Human dignity, that's a powerful concept. It goes beyond just legal rights. It speaks to the inherent worth of every individual.
Precisely. And the study guide emphasizes that the South African Constitution places human dignity at the center of its value system.
Okay, but how does that translate into real-world legal decisions? What kind of cases highlight the importance of human dignity?
One case that stands out is the Prince case, which dealt with the use of cannabis for religious purposes.
Oh, wow, that's a timely issue. What was the background of this case?
Mr. Prince was a Rastafarian who used cannabis as part of his religious practices. He was arrested and charged with possession of an illegal substance.
So he challenged his arrest on the grounds of religious freedom.
Exactly. And the case went all the way to the Constitutional Court, which had to consider whether the ban on cannabis infringed on Mr. Prince's right to religious freedom and human dignity.
What a fascinating case. What did the court decide?
The court recognized the sincerity of Mr. Prince's religious beliefs and found that the ban on cannabis did indeed infringe on his right to religious freedom.
So they ruled in his favor.
They did. And the study guide emphasizes that this case is significant because it demonstrates how the principle of human dignity can be used to protect individual rights, even when those rights might clash with broader societal norms.
It's like the court is saying, your beliefs are worthy of respect, even if they're not shared by everyone. That's a powerful message.
It is. And the study guide points out that the Prince case has had a ripple effect, leading to further legal challenges and discussions about decriminalizing cannabis use.
So it's not just about one man's right to use cannabis.
Yeah.
It's about broader societal conversations about individual freedom and the limits of state power.
Exactly. Now, the study guide also highlights another key aspect of human dignity, the right to life.
The right to life, that seems pretty straightforward. What kind of legal challenges could arise there?
Well, the study guide explores a controversial case that challenged the constitutionality of the death penalty.
Oh, wow. The death penalty. That's a heavy topic. What was the argument against it?
The case argued that the death penalty violated the inherent right to life and human dignity, even for those who had committed heinous crimes.
So it's a debate about the state's power to take a life, even in the name of justice. What did the court decide?
The Constitutional Court ultimately ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional. They emphasize that the right to life is inviolable and that even the worst offenders deserve to be treated with dignity.
That's a landmark decision. It shows that South Africa is committed to upholding human rights, even for those who have violated the rights of others.
Exactly. And the study guide points out that this case is a testament to the transformative power of the South African Constitution. It demonstrates a rejection of the brutality of the past and an embrace of a more humane and just legal system.
This is incredible. I'm seeing how these individual cases, these stories of real people fighting for their rights, bring the abstract principles of the Constitution to life.
And that's precisely what makes the study of constitutional law so compelling. It's not just about rules and regulations, it's about the human stories at the heart of these legal battles.
Okay, so we've covered equality, human dignity. What other key areas does a study guide delve into?
Well, the study guide also dedicates a significant portion to exploring socioeconomic rights, which, as we mentioned earlier, are a distinctive feature of the South African Constitution.
Socioeconomic rights. Those are the rights to things like housing, healthcare, food, water, the basic necessities for a decent life.
Exactly. And the study guide emphasizes that these rights aren't just aspirational ideals, they're legally enforceable rights that people can go to court to claim.
That's what makes the South African Constitution so progressive. But how does it work in practice? How can the courts force the government to provide things like housing and healthcare?
That's a great question, and the study guide explores this issue in depth. It explains that the courts recognize the progressive realization of socioeconomic rights.
Progressive realization, we touched on that earlier. It means that the government can't be expected to achieve these rights overnight, but they have to demonstrate that they're making reasonable efforts towards fulfilling them.
Exactly. And the study guide highlights several key cases that illustrate how this principle works in practice.
Okay, I'm really curious to hear about these cases. Let's start with housing. That's a fundamental need for everyone. What kind of legal challenges have arisen around the right to housing?
One of the most landmark cases in this area is the group boom case. It involved a group of people living in informal settlements who were evicted from their homes without alternative accommodation being provided.
So they went to court arguing that their right to housing was being
That's
violated.
exactly. And the Constitutional Court ruled that the government's eviction policy was unconstitutional because it failed to take into account the needs of the most vulnerable members of society.
So even though the government has limited resources, they can't just disregard the basic needs of those who are struggling the most.
Precisely. The group boom case established the principle that the government must provide some form of emergency housing for those who are facing homelessness, even if it's not permanent or ideal.
That's a significant victory for those who are struggling to find a place to live. What other cases does the study guide highlight in the realm of housing rights?
Another important case is the Olivia Road case, which dealt with the government's obligation to provide housing for people with disabilities.
Okay, so this is about ensuring that housing policies are inclusive and meet the specific needs of different groups. What happened in this case?
The case involved a group of people with disabilities who were living in dilapidated and inaccessible housing. They argued that the government had failed to provide them with adequate accommodation that met their needs.
So it's not just about having a roof over your head. It's about having a home that is safe, accessible, and allows you to live with dignity.
Exactly. And the Constitutional Court ruled in favor of the applicants, emphasizing that the government has a duty to consider the unique needs of people with disabilities when developing housing policies.
That's a crucial decision, because too often the needs of people with disabilities are overlooked or marginalized.
The study guide points out that the Olivia Road case is significant because it reinforces the principle of substantive equality. It's not enough to just treat everyone the same. You have to address the specific barriers and disadvantages that different groups face.
It's about creating a system where everyone has a genuine opportunity to thrive regardless of their circumstances. What other socioeconomic rights does the study guide cover?
Well, in addition to housing, it delves into the right to health care, which we touched on earlier with the Suber Money case.
Right. That case highlighted the tension between recognizing the right to health care and acknowledging the limitations of resources. What other cases does the study guide bring up in this area?
One case that stands out is the Treatment Action Campaign case, which dealt with the government's response to the HIV/AIDS epidemic.
Oh, wow. HIV/AIDS has had such a devastating impact on South Africa. What was the issue at stake in this case?
The Treatment Action Campaign, an HIV/AIDS activist group, challenged the government's policy on providing antiretroviral treatment to pregnant women with HIV. At the time, the government was only providing the treatment at a limited number of pilot sites.
So they were arguing that the government wasn't doing enough to prevent mother-to-child transmission of HIV.
Exactly. And the Constitutional Court ruled in favor of the Treatment Action Campaign, finding that the government's policy was unreasonable and violated the right to health care of both mothers and children.
That's a landmark decision. It shows that the court is willing to hold the government accountable for its actions, even in the face of a public health crisis.
The study guide emphasizes that the Treatment Action Campaign case is significant because it established the principle that the government must take proactive steps to fulfill the right to health care, even when it requires allocating significant resources.
It's about prioritizing the health and well-being of the population, even when it's difficult or expensive.
Exactly. And the Treatment Action Campaign case had a profound impact on HIV/AIDS policy in South Africa, leading to a significant expansion of access to antiretroviral treatment.
So it's a testament to the power of litigation to drive social change and improve people's lives. What other socioeconomic rights does the study guide explore?
In addition to housing and healthcare, it also covers the right to Social Security, which encompasses things like pensions, disability grants, and child support grants.
Okay, so this is about ensuring a safety net for those who are unable to support themselves. What kind of cases does the study guide highlight in this area?
One case that stands out is the COSA case, which involved the exclusion of permanent residents from accessing social grants.
So this is about who is entitled to receive social assistance from the government.
Exactly. At the time, the law only allowed South African citizens to receive these grants, excluding permanent residents, even if they had been living and working in the country for years.
That seems unfair. What did the court decide?
The Constitutional Court ruled that excluding permanent residents from social grants was unconstitutional. They emphasized that the right to Social Security should be based on need, not on citizenship status.
That's a really important decision. It recognizes that everyone who contributes to society deserves a basic level of support regardless of where they were born.
Precisely. And the study guide points out that the COSA case highlights the interconnectedness of different rights. The court recognized that excluding permanent residents from social grants not only violated their right to Social Security, but also their right to equality and dignity.
It's a reminder that these rights don't exist in isolation. They reinforce and support each other.
Exactly. Now, the study guide also explores another fascinating aspect of socioeconomic rights: the role of the courts in monitoring the government's progress in fulfilling these rights.
Okay, so it's not just about winning a case. It's about making sure the government actually follows through on its obligations. What's the process for that?
The study guide explains that the courts can issue something called a structural interdict, which is a powerful tool for ensuring government accountability.
A structural interdict? That sounds intense. What does it involve?
Essentially, a structural interdict allows the courts to oversee the government's implementation of a particular policy or program. It's like the court becomes a watchdog, making sure the government is taking concrete steps to fulfill its constitutional obligations.
So it's not just about issuing a ruling, it's about making sure that ruling translates into real change on the ground.
Exactly. And the study guide highlights several cases where structural interdicts have been used to address issues like housing shortages and inadequate healthcare facilities.
That's incredible. It shows that the courts are serious about ensuring that socioeconomic rights aren't just empty promises, they're real commitments that the government has to uphold.
You've got it. And I think these cases demonstrate how the South African Constitution is not just a document. It's a living, breathing framework for social transformation.
It's truly inspiring to see how these legal principles are being used to build a more just and equitable society. What else does the study guide cover in this exploration of socioeconomic rights?
Well, it delves into the concept of minimum core obligations, which refers to the bare minimum that the government must provide to fulfill a particular right.
So it's like a baseline standards, the central elements of a right that must be met even if the government can't achieve full realization right away.
Exactly. And the study guide explores how the courts have defined minimum core obligations in different areas, such as the right to housing, healthcare, and education.
What are some examples of these minimum core obligations?
In the context of housing, the courts have determined that the minimum core obligation includes providing access to emergency shelter for those who are homeless, as well as ensuring that evictions are carried out in a lawful and humane manner.
So even if the government can't provide everyone with a permanent home right away, they have a duty to protect the most vulnerable from being left on the streets.
Exactly. And when it comes to healthcare, the minimum core obligation includes providing access to basic healthcare services, such as immunizations, primary care, and essential medication.
So it's about ensuring that everyone has access to the basic building blocks of a healthy life, regardless of their ability to pay.
Precisely. And the study guide points out that the courts have been careful to define minimum core obligations in a way that is realistic and achievable, taking into account the government's available resources.
So it's a pragmatic approach, recognizing that social progress takes time and effort.
Exactly. And the study guide emphasizes that the concept of minimum core obligations is a crucial tool for ensuring that socioeconomic rights have real meaning and impact in people's lives.
It's about setting a clear standard that the government must meet, even as it works towards progressively realizing these rights more fully.
You've got it. And I think this exploration of socioeconomic rights really showcases the transformative potential of the South African Constitution. It's a reminder that the law can be a powerful force for social justice, even in the face of complex challenges and limited resources.
I'm absolutely blown away by the depth and nuance of these cases. It's clear that the South African legal system is grappling with some really fundamental questions about equality, dignity, and the role of the state in ensuring a just society.
It is, and the study guide does a brilliant job of guiding us through these complex issues, using case studies to bring the abstract principles to life.
I feel like we've covered so much ground already, but I know there's still more to explore. What other key areas does the study guide delve into?
Well, beyond the specific rights we've discussed, the study guide also dedicates a significant portion to understanding the structure and powers of the different branches of government.
Okay, so this is about how the different parts of the government fit together and how their powers are balanced and limited.
Exactly. The study guide emphasizes the principle of separation of powers, which means that the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government each have distinct roles and responsibilities.
So it's about preventing any one branch from becoming too powerful and ensuring a system of checks and balances.
Precisely. The study guide explains that the legislative branch, which is the parliament, is responsible for making laws. The executive branch, which is the president and the cabinet, is responsible for implementing those laws. And the judicial branch, which is the courts, is responsible for interpreting and applying the law.
So it's like a three-legged stool, each leg supporting the others to create a stable and balanced system.
That's a great analogy. And the study guide delves into how these different branches interact with each other and how their powers are limited by the Constitution.
What are some examples of how these powers are limited?
Well, for example, the president can't just make laws on a whim. Any law proposed by the executive branch has to be debated and approved by Parliament. And the courts have the power to review laws passed by Parliament to make sure they are consistent with the Constitution.
So there are checks and balances at every stage to prevent any one branch from overstepping its bounds.
Exactly. And the study guide highlights several cases where the courts have struck down laws passed by Parliament or actions taken by the executive branch because they were found to be unconstitutional.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful institutions are subject to the rule of law and the limits set by the Constitution.
Precisely. And the study guide emphasizes that this system of checks and balances is crucial for protecting individual rights and ensuring a democratic and accountable government.
It's like a safety net, making sure that power is exercised responsibly and that no one is above the law.
You got it. Now, the study guide also explores the concept of judicial review, which is the power of the courts to review laws and government actions to ensure they are consistent with the Constitution.
We've talked about that a bit already. It's the court's role as the guardians of the Constitution, making sure everyone is playing by the rules.
Exactly. And the study guide delves into the history and evolution of judicial review in South Africa, highlighting key cases that have shaped its development.
What are some of the landmark cases in this area?
One of the most famous is the certification of the Constitution case, which took place before the final Constitution was adopted.
So this was a case about the Constitution itself.
Exactly. The Constitutional Court had to review the draft Constitution to ensure that it complied with the 34 constitutional principles that had been agreed upon during the transition from apartheid.
Wow, so the court had a crucial role in shaping the very foundation of the new South Africa.
They did. And the study guide explains that the court's decision in the certification case established the principle that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land and that all other laws and government actions must be consistent with it.
That's a powerful statement. It sets a clear hierarchy with the Constitution at the top, guiding everything else.
Exactly. And the study guide highlights that judicial review is a cornerstone of South African constitutional law, ensuring that the values and principles enshrined in the Constitution are upheld and protected.
It's a constant process of interpretation and application, making sure that the Constitution remains relevant and responsive to the changing needs of society.
You've got it. And the study guide points out that judicial review is not without its controversies. Some argue that it gives the courts too much power, while others maintain that it is essential for safeguarding democracy and human rights.
It's a debate that's playing out in legal systems around the world, that tension between judicial power and democratic accountability.
Exactly. Now, the study guide also delves into the specific powers and functions of the Constitutional Court, which is the highest court in South Africa when it comes to constitutional matters.
Right, we talked about that earlier. The Constitutional Court is like the final arbiter of constitutional disputes.
Precisely. And the study guide explains that the Constitutional Court has exclusive jurisdiction over certain matters, such as disputes between organs of state and the constitutionality of any parliamentary or provincial bill.
So if there's a disagreement between the president and parliament, or if someone challenges the validity of a new law, those cases go straight to the Constitutional Court.
You got it. And the study guide highlights the significance of the Constitutional Court's role in shaping the development of constitutional law in South Africa.
It's like they're the ultimate interpreters of the Constitution, setting precedents that guide the entire legal system.
Exactly. And the study guide points out that the Constitutional Court has issued landmark rulings on a wide range of issues, from the death penalty to same-sex marriage to the right to housing.
It's incredible to see how the court has grappled with such fundamental questions, shaping the very fabric of South African society.
It is, and the study guide emphasizes that the Constitutional Court's decisions have not only impacted legal doctrine, but have also had a profound impact on the lives of ordinary South Africans.
It's a reminder that the law is not just about abstract theories, it's about real people and the impact it has on their lives.
Exactly. Now, the study guide also explores the different ways in which cases can reach the Constitutional Court.
Okay, so it's not like anyone can just walk in and file a case. There are specific procedures and pathways.
You got it. The study guide explains that cases can reach the Constitutional Court through direct access appeals from lower courts and referrals from other bodies.
So there were multiple routes to the top depending on the nature of the case and the legal issues involved.
Exactly. And the study guide delves into the criteria that the Constitutional Court uses to decide whether to grant leave to appeal or to hear a case directly.
So they have to filter through a lot of cases to determine which ones warrant their attention.
Precisely. And the study guide emphasizes that the Constitutional Court typically only hears cases that raise significant constitutional issues or that have the potential to impact the development of constitutional law.
It's about prioritizing cases that have broad implications, setting precedents that will guide future legal decisions.
You've got it. Now, the study guide also highlights the importance of public interest litigation in South Africa.
Public interest litigation. That's when organizations or individuals bring cases to court, not just for their own benefit, but for the benefit of a larger group, or for the advancement of a particular cause.
Exactly. And the study guide explains that public interest litigation has played a crucial role in shaping constitutional law in South Africa, particularly in the areas of socioeconomic rights and equality.
We've seen that in the cases we've discussed already, like the Treatment Action Campaign case and the Groot Boom case. Those were brought by organizations fighting for the rights of marginalized communities.
Precisely. And the study guide points out that the Constitutional Court has been receptive to public interest litigation, recognizing its importance in ensuring access to justice for those who might not otherwise be able to afford it.
It's a reminder that the law should serve everyone, not just those with the resources to navigate the legal system.
You've got it. And the study guide emphasizes that public interest litigation has been a powerful tool for social change in South Africa, helping to advance the realization of constitutional rights for all.
This is incredible. We've gone from the foundations of the Constitution to exploring specific rights to understanding the structure and powers of the government and the role of the courts. The study guide has really painted a comprehensive picture of South African constitutional law.
It has, and I think it's testament to the dynamism and complexity of this area of law. It's not just about memorizing rules. It's about understanding the ongoing dialogue between the Constitution, the courts, and the people of South Africa.
It's about the constant struggle to build a more just and equitable society, using the law as a tool for transformation. What other key areas does the study guide cover in this exploration of South African constitutional law?
Well, beyond the structural and procedural aspects we've discussed, the study guide also delves into some of the specific challenges and debates that have shaped the development of constitutional law in South Africa.
Okay, so this is about understanding the context in which these legal principles are being applied, the real-world factors that influence how the Constitution is interpreted and enforced.
Exactly. The study guide explores a wide range of issues, from the legacy of apartheid and the ongoing struggle for racial justice to the impact of globalization and the changing economic landscape.
It's a reminder that the law doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by the social, political, and economic forces at play in society.
Precisely. And the study guide highlights how these forces have influenced the interpretation of the Constitution and the development of constitutional jurisprudence in South Africa.
What are some examples of the specific challenges and debates that the study guide explores?
Well, one of the key issues is the tension between individual rights and collective rights. The South African Constitution recognizes both individual rights, like freedom of speech, and the right to a fair trial, and collective rights, like the right to culture and language.
So it's about finding a balance between protecting individual freedoms and recognizing the rights of groups and communities.
Exactly. And the study guide explores how the courts have navigated this tension, sometimes prioritizing individual rights over collective rights, and sometimes vice versa, depending on the specific context of the case.
It's a delicate balancing act, weighing the competing interests at stake and trying to find a solution that upholds the values of the Constitution.
Precisely. Another key challenge the study guide highlights is the issue of poverty and inequality. Despite the progress made since the end of apartheid, South Africa still faces deep-seated socioeconomic disparities.
We've seen that in the cases we've discussed about socioeconomic rights. The right to housing, healthcare, and Social Security are all crucial for addressing poverty and inequality.
Exactly. And the study guide explores how the courts have used the Constitution to try to address these issues, pushing the government to take proactive steps to alleviate poverty and promote economic justice.
It's a reminder that the law can be a powerful tool for social change, but it can't solve these problems on its own. It requires a multifaceted approach involving government policies, social activism, and economic development.
You've got it. And the study guide emphasizes that the struggle for social justice in South Africa is ongoing, requiring constant vigilance and a commitment to upholding the values of the Constitution.
It's an inspiring reminder that the pursuit of a more just and equitable society never ends. What other challenges and debates does the study guide cover?
Well, it also delves into the issue of corruption, which has been a major problem in South Africa in recent years.
Corruption undermines trust in government and erodes the very foundations of a democratic society.
Exactly. And the study guide explores how the courts have used the Constitution to try to combat corruption, holding government officials accountable for their actions and promoting transparency and good governance.
It's a reminder that the rule of law applies to everyone, regardless of their position or power.
Precisely. Now, the study guide also examines the impact of globalization on constitutional law in South Africa.
Globalization, that's the increasing interconnectedness of the world with the flow of goods, services, capital, and ideas across borders. How does that affect constitutional law?
Well, globalization raises a number of complex legal issues, from the regulation of international trade and investment to the protection of human rights in a globalized world.
So it's about understanding how the Constitution applies in a world that is increasingly interconnected and where national boundaries are becoming more fluid.
Exactly. And the study guide explores how the South African courts have grappled with these issues, trying to balance national sovereignty with the need to engage with the global community.
It's a delicate balancing act, navigating the complexities of a world that is both interconnected and fragmented.
Precisely. And the study guide emphasizes that the challenges and debates we've discussed are not unique to South Africa. They are issues that legal systems around the world are grappling with as they try to uphold the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in an ever-changing global landscape.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of justice is a universal struggle, and that the lessons learned in one country can inform and inspire the work being done in others.
Exactly. Now, the study guide also dedicates a chapter to the role of international law in shaping constitutional law in South Africa.
Okay, so this is about understanding how South Africa's legal system interacts with the broader body of international law, those treaties, conventions, and customary rules that govern relations between nations.
Precisely. The study guide explains that South Africa has a dualist legal system, which means that international law does not automatically become part of domestic law. It has to be incorporated through legislation or by the courts recognizing it as part of customary international law.
So there's a process of translation bringing those international norms into the South African legal framework.
Exactly. And the study guide explores how the courts have approached this task, sometimes incorporating international law directly into their decisions and sometimes using it as a source of guidance or inspiration.
What are some examples of how international law has influenced constitutional law in South Africa?
Well, one area where international law has had a significant impact is in the development of human rights jurisprudence.
Right, because human rights are universal. They transcend national boundaries.
Exactly. And the study guide highlights how the South African courts have drawn on international human rights treaties and conventions, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, to inform their interpretation of the Bill of Rights.
So they're looking to the global community for guidance on how to best protect and promote human rights.
Precisely. Another area where international law has played a role is in the development of environmental law.
Environmental law, that's a crucial area, especially in a world facing the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation.
Exactly. And the study guide explains that South Africa is a party to numerous international environmental treaties, such as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity.
So there's a global framework for addressing these environmental challenges, and South Africa is part of that effort.
Precisely. And the study guide explores how the courts have used these international treaties to inform their interpretation of the environmental right in the Bill of Rights.
So it's about ensuring that South African law is aligned with global efforts to protect the environment.
Exactly. And the study guide emphasizes that the interaction between international law and constitutional law is a dynamic and evolving process as the global community continues to grapple with new challenges and develop new legal norms.
It's a reminder that the law is not static. It's constantly adapting to the changing world around us.
Precisely. And I think this exploration of the challenges and debates surrounding South African constitutional law really highlights the vibrancy and relevance of this field. It's not just about dusty legal doctrines, it's about grappling with real-world issues that affect people's lives.
Absolutely. And I think the study guide does a fantastic job of not only explaining these complex legal concepts, but also showing how they play out in practice through real-life case studies and examples.
I agree. It's one thing to read about abstract legal principles, but it's quite another to see how they're actually applied in courtrooms and how they impact the lives of ordinary people.
Exactly. It makes the whole subject come alive and shows just how powerful the law can be in shaping a more just and equitable society.
You've got it. And I think that's a really important takeaway for our listeners. The law is not just something that happens in ivory towers or courtrooms. It's something that affects all of us in profound ways.
Well said. So to our listeners, I encourage you to keep those legal thinking caps on head, keep exploring those legal documents, and keep asking those tough questions. Because the more we understand the law, the better equipped we are to use it as a force for good in the world.
Absolutely. Until our next deep dive, stay curious and engaged.
Wow. It's amazing to see how South African constitutional law is shaped by so many different factors. From historical legacies to global trends, the study guide has really opened my eyes to the complexities of this field.
It certainly has. And I think one of the key takeaways is that constitutional law isn't just a set of abstract principles. It's a living and breathing framework that is constantly evolving and adapting to new challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So where does the study guide leave us? What kind of parting thoughts or key insights does it offer for someone who wants to keep exploring this field?
Well, one of the things the study guide emphasizes is the importance of critical engagement with the law. It encourages readers to not just passively absorb information, but to actively question, analyze, and think critically about the legal principles and cases we've discussed.
That's so important because the law isn't just about memorizing rules. It's about understanding how those rules are applied and interpreted and considering the impact they have on people's lives.
Precisely. The study guide also encourages readers to think about the broader context in which the law operates, to consider the social, political, and economic factors that shape legal decisions, and to reflect on the role of the law in promoting social justice and equality.
It's about recognizing that the law is not neutral or objective. It's a product of human choices and values. And it's up to us to engage with it critically and thoughtfully to ensure that it serves the needs of all members of society.
Exactly. And I think the study guide also leaves us with a sense of hope. It demonstrates the transformative power of the law and highlights the many ways in which the South African Constitution has been used to advance human rights, promote equality, and address social injustices.
It's inspiring to see how people have used the law to fight for a better future. And it reminds us that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing journey.
It is, and the study guide concludes with a call to action, encouraging readers to not just study the law, but to actively participate in shaping its future, to engage in public discourse, advocate for legal reform, and use their knowledge and skills to make a positive impact on their communities and the world around them.
That's a powerful message to end on. It's a reminder that the law is not just something we study or observe, it's something we can all contribute to and shape for the better.
Precisely. And I think that's a fitting conclusion to our deep dive into the fascinating and complex world of South African constitutional law.
Well said. So to our listeners, I encourage you to keep those legal thinking caps on. Keep exploring those legal documents and keep asking those tough questions, because the more we understand the law, the better equipped we are to use it as a force for good in the world.
Absolutely. Until our next deep dive, stay curious and engaged.